Hi, everyone. Welcome to Book Club Favorites October Book Club event. This past month, we have been reading CLOUD CUCKOO LAND by the Pulitzer Prize winning author Anthony Doerr. Tony is joining us today for our book club discussion, along with some fabulous people who helped to work on this new novel, Stu, the associate publisher, and Brianna, our director of marketing. We are also excited to have you at this live event today. Before we kick off our discussion, I just wanted to let all viewers know that we are running a giveaway. To enter for a chance to win, just comment a question that you have for this discussion down in the comment section of this video, and doing so will enter you into our sweepstakes for a chance to win a copy of this novel, CLOUD CUCKOO LAND, as well as Anthony Doerr's previous award-winning novel, All the Light We Cannot See. So again, just ask a question in the comment section of this video to enter, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as we can on screen today. And now I will throw to our participants to get started with our discussion. Tony, how about you give all of us a brief overview about what CLOUD CUCKOO LAND is about?
Sure. Thanks, Holly. Hi, Brianna. Hi, Stu. Hi, everybody. First of all, thanks so much for tuning in the middle of your day to talk about books. It's so exciting that there are readers out there. Forget about my weird books. It's such a good step for your mental health to join book clubs, whether they're virtual or not, and to share this experience of reading with other people. All right, CLOUD CUCKOO LAND. This thing. I mean, Stu and Brianna, you guys can just like take a nap now if you want, because it's going to take a while. But this thing kind of started with this book. This book took me 10 years to write, and I finished it in 2014. And it's set, you can see on the cover, it's set a little bit in this walled city called Saint-Malo in Brittany, France. Maybe, I don't know, 70% of the novel is set there. That's got about 2 kilometers of walls around it, old medieval walls. And it was part of Hitler's vast megalomaniacal, crazy idea to build this 2,000-mile wall called the Atlantic Wall, a series of fortifications, millions of tons of concrete, slave labor, trying to defend the whole coast of Finland, Denmark, Belgium, all the way to the Franco-Spanish border. Every text that I would read about the history of defensive walls and this crazy project of Hitler's would mention the walls of Constantinople. And I knew nothing about them. Constantinople was like this. I knew it was Istanbul. That's about all I knew. And I grew up in Ohio, and in Western civilization class, we would reach kind of the fall of the Roman Empire. And then the teacher would go like take a little sip of water. And then suddenly we're in the Renaissance. Like 1,100 years have skimmed past. So I love to use my job, my opportunity to write books as a way to kind of investigate various things that I'm ignorant about. I'm obviously going to die ignorant about a million things. But in this case, I was like, what's Byzantium? What's the Byzantine Empire? I knew nothing about it. The walls of Constantinople stood for 1,100 years, the land walls, without being breached. 23 sieges came up against them and failed. And they stood for 1,100 years. There were these huge triple walls. They were really the preeminent defensive fortification in the world, until gunpowder arrives in Europe in the 15th century. Just like this novel was about a new technology, the radio, entering Europe and really disrupting existing power structures. It allowed for really this distortion of truth on a massive scale that had never been tried in human history, the way Germans could change the truth in people's living rooms for millions of people. It really allowed and helped facilitate the murder of millions of human beings. In this case, when gunpowder arrives in Europe around the same time the printing press is about to arrive, all these walled cities, and really all through China too, all suddenly are vulnerable. And so the original impetus for the story was just this 19-year-old Ottoman Sultan. It always seems to be young people who recognize the power of a new technology. He decides to forge these massive mega, like Death Star from Star Wars like cannons and drag them to the walls of Constantinople in 1453 to see if he can finally make this old technology of walls obsolete once and for all. For about a year, I was working on this story. I had a girl inside the city, a boy in the Ottoman army going to the walls. Her name was Anna. His name was Omir. But it wasn't until I learned about book culture inside Constantinople that I started to think, oh my gosh, I found that kind of vein of electricity that I can tap into to sustain a years-long project. Not only did the walls stand for long enough to allow the empire to accumulate insane wealth, like, ivory and timber and furs from the north, oil and, from the Mediterranean, slaves from all over the world, spices from the east, really this nexus of Europe and Asia in Constantinople. But it also allowed the empire to have libraries. And as the last copies of Greek and Roman texts from the ancient world were decaying all over North Africa, all through Europe, the last copies of these texts were saved and preserved inside of Constantinople. So that's when I realized, when I learned that 75% of the ancient Greek texts that we have today only exist because some librarian, some schoolmaster, some monk inside of the walls of Constantinople decided to recopy that text and preserve it through time. That's when I started thinking, I've got something, I've got a project here. So that's a kind of beginning anyway, an entry. That's how I began this crazy experiment of this novel.
That's awesome. And I love to hear you talk about your origin story so much. What I want to hear more about a little bit is in this story, it's not only a historical tale, but it actually there's some modern day story, and then there's some futuristic stories that are in it. So how did you decide to connect all of those?
That's right, Stu. So, okay, I'm like a year into the project. I've got Anna and Omir. In some ways, that structure felt a little bit like the structure of All the Light We Cannot See, which is an A-B back and forth structure. I have a French girl and a German boy. For the most part, although I vary the rhythm here and there, you move back and forth in short chapters between those two characters. And so for a good 11, 12 months, that was what Cloud Cuckoo Land was. But as I started to think about stewardship and conservation in my own life, as I started to watch my own kids get older and need me less, I started to think more about the best way to dramatize the single act of just a small act of stewardship is to show that act ricochet down through time. So I don't think it's too much of a spoiler for the folks who haven't finished the book to know that Anna, this girl inside the city of Constantinople, discovers what might be the very last copy of a very old book, very humble book, a silly story almost called Cloud Cuckoo Land. She decides to preserve it, maybe with the help of the boy outside the walls. I won't give too much away. But to really dramatize the impact of that, I thought I have to show this land in the hands of readers long after she's gone from the earth, because I think that's really what stewardship is. That's what really almost all librarians are, is they're thinking about the next generation when they decide to protect stories. So I decided, first I take a gulp and decide I'm going to set it in the present. I'm going to look for another time in which a confluence of new technologies are really disrupting things. And you can see it all around us. I can see it in my kids in the way they just can't get off their phones. So I thought, okay, I'm going to set it in the present. I'm going to invent two more characters and have this book that she saves, Cloud Cuckoo Land, ricochet down through the pegboard of time and land in their hands. And then about 3 months later, I decide, you know what, to really show what the future of humanity means and ask questions about it, is I'm also going to go into the future. I'm going to make a tripartite structure, past, present, and future. So I invented a fifth character, Constance, and she's trapped on board this ship. And she also needs this story. She's really the reader for whom this story is intended for. So as it moves through time, hopefully the reader, especially in the beginning of the novel, will stick with me and trust me that there are resonances building between all five of these characters. And hopefully by the end, you start to feel there's almost this pentagon, this intertwining between all five characters and all three time periods.
So when you're sitting down to connect all these characters to each other, do you have to put yourself in each character's head? What's your process like to get into each individual head and time period?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was kind of like making 5 murals, each one like as long as a city block, and also trying to have them all interconnect and interweave in some way. So often I need to make sure I'm working on each of the 5 characters pretty frequently so that the ice doesn't kind of form over their sections, or keep the mural metaphor going so the paint doesn't dry. Yeah, I love that stuff though. I think it's so fun to say, like, one day I'm reading about footwear in the 15th century, like what would Anna have worn on her feet as she works in this embroidery house in Constantinople. And then 2 days later, I'm reading about some futurist predicting the power of AI to, make a comprehensive library. So I'm folding that into Constance's section. So for me, an ensemble novel like this is a real joy, because if you get stuck in one place or you have a failure of nerve one morning with one of Anna's sections, there's always something else you can be working on. And if you can keep them all kind of spinning in your mind, then your subconscious during the rest of the day, when you're taking a shower or walking the dogs, then your subconscious can kind of start to solve some of the problems and start to recognize, our brains are like pattern making machines. We love to recognize patterns, even sometimes when patterns are not there. And so for me, I love to be able to start thinking in the evenings in particular, like how can I build a little resonance between, say, Constance's section in the future and Omir's section, 800 years before she's born.
And I know it might be asking you like if you have a favorite child or something like that, but did you have a favorite character to write?
It is kind of like asking if you have a favorite child. I think the novelists I admire the most are empathetic, even towards their characters who act the most poorly. And so I think even when, say, Seymour, especially at the beginning half of the novel, this one character, this teenager in the present, is behaving pretty poorly, I think it's really important to empathize with him and try to understand where he's coming from. So I try not to have favorites. I think a reader can feel that maybe if you're having a little more fun in one section or you're a little more empathetic with one character, then the novel starts to get a little wonky and lopsided. And so it's really important to invest equal empathetic and imaginative effort in each of those 5 characters or as many characters as you have. So no, I get to ask that question, Stu, about my books sometimes too. Like, do you have a favorite book that you've written? But I don't think in those terms. They're just things you're making. And to do that well, you have to invest your whole imaginative soul into each of those people. So yeah.
So it's parceled out.
Some days you're just like, I can't work on, Zeno goes to, I don't think it gives too much away. He goes to the Korean War, and, some days the psychic effort of reading about what these prisoners of war went through during the Korean War, this really forgotten war that we don't talk about much. And a lot of these guys, when they returned, were treated so poorly when they got back to the United States. So some days that was so draining that there's days I would have to take breaks from Zeno. So he wouldn't be my favorite during those days, if that makes sense.
Tony, we've got a question from an audience member named Ekta. They asked, did you write the stories separately, and how did you connect the individual threads?
Yes, great question. First, let me put a disclaimer. There are as many ways to do this as there are writers. So don't assume that, especially if you're interested in getting into writing, don't assume that my way is the only way you should approach things. But I will very rarely write something even a short story, in the order in which a reader will read it. Just in the way that, say, if you go for a walk this afternoon, you kind of want to, before you go, know how far you're going and where you're going to end up. Often when I'm, especially a quarter of the way or a third of the way through a project, I'm starting to work on sections that happen quite late. Often I'm working on the ending. I wrote the ending to this novel maybe 7 years before I finished it. And so you're building these connective tissue, all this bridging material toward it. Americans, we worship efficiency, right? It's like so hard to divorce yourself from this feeling like, oh, I'm being inefficient here. I don't know where this is quite going. So much of art making is just about embracing the unknowingness of it. You just have to say, I don't quite know if these scenes, this month of work I'm spending on a scene in Constantinople is going to end up anywhere. You just have to kind of embrace the journey for those months. It's always a garden of many forking paths. But in my case, often I'm not quite sure, and I'm trying stuff that maybe you'll read 70% of the way through the novel, but I'm trying it in the first year that I'm trying to write the book, just to see where these characters are end up, how they might behave when they're a little bit older. And then as you get there, you might have to discard 50 or 60% of it, but at least you started dreaming out that section so that when you're building the bridge, you kind of understand how the bridge looks on both sides of the river. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. And we also have a question from Mindy, who is asking about the title of the book and how you came up with it and whether there were other titles in the running.
Yeah, thanks, Mindy. Of course. I'm curious to know, well, Stu and Brianna, at least you guys can talk live. Had you ever encountered the phrase Cloud Cuckoo Land before seeing this weird manuscript?
Not in a positive way.
Never. Okay. Yeah, exactly. It's more common. I think it's maybe most common in Irish English, I'm learning, but it's also pretty common in British English. And you're right, it's often used disparagingly. Like, let's say a politician thinks COVID's going to go away tomorrow. They'll say, oh, he's living in Cloud Cuckoo Land, that kind of thing. But of course, the phrase vastly predates English. It comes from a play called The Birds by Aristophanes 2,400 years ago. So much of this book operates on this this kind of dialectic, this spectrum between conservation and stewardship and destruction and erasure. And as I was working on the book, I was reminded and relearning how many texts we've lost. For example, Sappho, the poet, you may have heard of her, from 650 BC. We think she wrote 10,000 lines of poetry. We only have 650 left. Aristotle, we only have about a third of the text that he wrote. The playwright Aeschylus, who many people think was the original, the best dramatist from ancient Greece, we think he wrote maybe 90 plays. We only have 7 of those left. Aristophanes, we know he wrote dozens and dozens of comedies. We only have 7 remaining, at least in full. One is called The Birds. I had never read it until I started the project and was searching for the book that Anna might rescue from the ruins of a library in Constantinople. And so as I read it, I'm like, oh my gosh, first of all, it's pretty funny. There's a lot of inside jokes that only Athenians 2,400 years ago would have understood, but there's plenty of humor in the novel. It's really about these 2 kind of doofuses who decide to leave Athens because there's too many lawyers, and they decide to build a new city in the sky with the help of the birds. It's halfway between the realm of the gods in the heavens and the realm of people down on earth, so that they can intercept the messages that pass back and forth. And they call this place CLOUD CUCKOO LAND, Nephilo Kokuya. In the 19th century, you could see it a lot as like Cloud Cuckoo Place or Cuckoo Cloud Place, Cuckoo Cloud Town. In the 20th century, it really starts to settle into CLOUD CUCKOO LAND in English. I think most Americans, if they've been exposed to it at all, they're exposed to it through the Lego movie, which I've been interested to learn. I think a lot of kids are saying they see the book and they're like, oh, I know that place, because some classicist was working at Lego. I love that. That movie's, I think, 2014. But for me, maybe this is true for a lot of parents on here. I know Squid Game has been in the news a lot, and there was a Frank Bruni column in the New York Times about it. There's so much dystopia narrative out there. And my kids were 10, my twin boys were 10 to 17 as I was writing this book. And they took in so many dystopias, whether it was reading Hunger Games or watching all these Marvel movies where planets are just exploding all over the place, or whole cities are just leveled by aliens. And I just started to wonder, like, what is it doing to them? What is it like to take in so many dystopia narratives? And here I had this example of an old utopia narrative. And I thought, what if I tried to explore questions about those 2 things, about the end of the world, and what does it mean that in so many cultures we've told stories about traveling far away to better places where there is no suffering? So CLOUD CUCKOO LAND was a way for me to explore that. I think each of the 5 characters kind of dreams of a better life, and then ultimately travels in this circle to come to kind of a journey of acceptance where they realize this is the only life I'm going to have, and how can I make it as rich and meaningful as possible?
So was it always CLOUD CUCKOO LAND then? There were no other titles ever?
Oh, yeah, no, there were. That's right. I forgot that part of the question. No, for a while, I thought about inventing a lost Aristophanes play. So I was looking at a bunch of the titles of his plays, the Storks, the Phoenician Women, but it was so thorny to try to think up, to try to dream up, how he exactly would have written. I just felt that task was way out of my league to dive into all this esoteric scholarship to try to reimagine a lost Aristophanes play. But then I started looking at other ancient writers whose work had been lost, but whose titles still remained. And for a while, there was a writer named Callimachus. He was one of the first librarians at the Library of Alexandria. Apparently, he wrote over 800 volumes, and all we have left are a few hymns. Basically, that's all that's left of all of his work. But one of his books was called I think it's called A Collection of Wonders of the Entire World According to Location. So for a good 3 or 4 months, that was the title. But I could hear, you guys know Nan, my editor, I could hear her voice in my head like, that's pretty wordy. And I was quite paranoid about the CLOUD CUCKOO LAND title too. It's got a lot of consonants in it. It's not as pretty as All the Light We Cannot See. And I worried people might think it's a children's story. It's got that word cuckoo in it. So I had to kind of fight for it with Nan a little bit, but I think she was won over eventually.
Yes, we all were.
Well, I'm glad you won that fight for sure. We want to do a quick reminder that we do have a giveaway going on. You can enter for a chance to win a copy of CLOUD CUCKOO LAND and All the Light We Cannot See by entering a question into the chat. And then Brianna has a few more questions from the audience.
Yeah, we have a question from Laura, which I've read the book and I find a little difficult question because it says she wants to know, where did Constance live on Earth? Which I find is an interesting question because, of course, you set it up very early on that she's not on Earth, right?
That's right. Yeah, Constance doesn't live on Earth. I think we're just gonna keep it there. I don't want to spoil too much because you start, especially in Constance's sections, you start the novel in media res, they say, in the middle of things, and you have to do a bunch of work. She's kind of a detective, kind of trying to figure out the origin of this book and why this story was important to her father. Her father, you learn kind of early on, grows up in Australia and decides to join this project, this Planet B project of trying to find a new home. I think that's all I can say. She has a little Australian in her, but really there's the culture. There's 86 people aboard this really confined space, and they build their own little culture. And there's an AI named Sybil who's almost like this omniscient presence, this almost God to some of them, because they trust her to solve all their problems and to steer the ship and to contain all of human culture and knowledge. And so as the novel goes on, you start to learn maybe Sybil is not as all powerful as Constance was led to believe as a little girl. But really, she's a product of a place that is not a place. Utopia means no place. So I'm playing with that all the time. And so she's almost like, the name Argos comes from Jason and the Argonauts. She's just really a kind of journeyer. So she's a product not so much of Earth, but of this little specific, strange culture that materializes between these 86 people.
Great. We have one more question from Anna about how and why you chose to give Omir cleft palate.
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. Well, mostly just watching my friend Carmen and understanding that how before surgical repair could be done of cleft palates, what the lives were like for human beings who were otherwise entirely physiologically the same as all their neighbors. And yet they were often victims of awful superstition. So just diving into the history of that really gave me a sense of what your life would be like. I needed, without spoiling too much, I need Omir to make a very important fundamental decision about 2/3 of the way through the novel. And so I needed a way for him to feel different and feel a little bit outcast from all these other boys and young men enlisted into this enormous military undertaking. And so he has this visual disfigurement, so to speak. And so here is a way for me to say all his life he's been kind of shunted and pushed away. And I think that prepares him to be a little more courageous than some of his peers.
Great.
One thing we haven't really touched on yet is the fact that this book has a pandemic. It has, some climate change things. We published you in a time of a pandemic. What were your thoughts? How were you feeling about that?
Yeah, gosh. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I first told Nan, my editor, that I would get her the manuscript in December of 2020. And then as that's getting closer, I'm like, oh boy, I once again said I was going to get something done and couldn't quite get there. And so I said, okay, March, I'm going to get you the manuscript in March. I sent, I think, the first 2/3 to my agent in February when I was like, oh, everything's still fine. And there is a pandemic in the novel in Constance's sections. I don't think that spoils too much to say. I had read in 2016 a book called Spillover by this amazing naturalist, science explainer. He's a great communicator of science named David Quammen, Quammen, if folks know the novel, mostly exploring SARS, but just, exploring how the more we infringe on non-human populations, because we're always expanding, there's more humans on Earth than there were, so many more than when I was born, that the more likely that viruses will spill over from non-human populations into the human population. So it's not out of the realm of possibility at all that a pandemic could arise. But then, I'm working on, I have sentences in the novel, Stu, like the virus can persist on surfaces for up to a week. Or, I'm using phrases like quarantine 1 and quarantine 2, thinking like, how cool is this? Nobody's using phrases like this. And, and printing out the novel in pretty early March, getting ready to send it to Nan. And then, the whole world is changing so quickly. First, there's the first 2 weeks when your kids aren't going to school and you're like, wait, what's happening here? Are we going to be like inside our houses watching our neighbors die, that kind of stuff. And then finally, as things start to settle down, sort of, I'm so grateful in that, I was downhill on this project. So I was able to kind of keep my focus and kind of lock the anxiety of what was happening around the world out of the room. and be able to keep working without risking my own health, which is such a privilege. I understand. I think it really maybe it accelerated the urgency of some of the questions I was trying to ask in the novel. Seymour gets really upset when a forest that he's attached to, this boy living in the present, when this forest behind his house is razed to make room for development. And I'm writing those sections before where I live, Boise, Idaho, becomes the fastest growing city in the United States. And the pandemic really accelerates that as more and more people are leaving cities and trying to find smaller communities to live in. And suddenly all these predictions that I was reading for Seymour's sections of climate change in, say, 2015, 2016, when they're saying, oh, there could be fires in the West of over 1 million acres, and that could happen by 2030. And the next thing you know, they're happening in 2019. So I think that, the headline on a lot of this stuff is it's all happening more quickly and in larger scales than we predicted. So I started to feel a lot of urgency for some of the questions in the novel, even the questions about AI and some of the predictions of AI that are happening much more quickly in Constance's section, than I was imagining they would in Constance's section in the future. So I think the pandemic, for the most part, just made all these things feel a little more urgent. And from a more philosophical point of view, the novel really is about, and the novel's got this book inside the book, and it's really about how, to go back to Walls, about how reading, for me anyway, has been a way to slip the walls of my own mind, to slip the confines of my own life and live multiple streams of life. I think I'm happiest when I'm engaged in a novel that I'm reading that's really I'm so excited to go back to in the evenings, because it helps me slip the trap of my own head and feel less alone, feel more recognized through the lives of other people. So I think that's another thing that the pandemic really taught me, that a severed life is a really impoverished life, and books are these little filaments of connections that can tie you to community and make you understand that people 500 years ago or people across the globe cry for the same reasons we cry. And so it always makes me feel a little more connected and a little less alone. And so maybe the underlying theme of the novel itself, which is reading serving as this connective tissue through time, maybe the pandemic helped accelerate that feeling or accentuate that feeling for me too.
And more people actually started reading again in the pandemic, which is great. But we're coming up on the end of our time, unfortunately. But we have one last question from Susan, who's asking what you're working on now.
Oh, Susan, thanks so much. Well, unfortunately, this may not be the most exciting answer, because I try not to talk about stuff until it's a little stronger. Like, these are just like little seedlings coming up out of the dirt, and I'm like pouring water on them. But I feel like if I said anything, I'd be watching Brianna and Stu's eyes so carefully to see like what their reaction was. They'd be like, I don't know, that sounds weird, Tony. Suddenly I'd lose all my confidence in it. So often I try to get 9 or 10 months of solid work in on something before I even explain what it's about or what it might be about to my wife, just because I feel like you never know, you just never know until it's all trial and error, and you never know until you get going if something's going to take on a life of its own or not. So I'm trying to find time every day to keep the paint wet on this little new project, but unfortunately I'm going to keep it under wraps for a little longer, Susan.
Shoot. Okay. Oh, Brianna's on mute.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we'll wait in suspense. It's a good suspenseful note to leave it on. Just let's not leave it for another 7 years, Tony, okay?
I just want to get into your search history or something and try to get a few clues about what's going on in there right now. Because I know you were fascinated with radios and then walls, and now I'm like, what's your new fascination? Just a little...
That's it. Yeah, it'll be something like that. Yeah, well, now I'm going to give too much away, but yeah, it's always some human technology. I mean, in this case, the best, maybe we can finish with this. Like, this is the most extraordinary human technology of all, this codex. It's so efficient. It can hold so much information. It's easy to find things in it. We haven't, it's been around since the 3rd or 4th century, and we haven't really improved on it. And so I think like, what is an amazing thing that we've invented this technology that can outlive a person's life. And so thanks to everybody out there who's a custodian of books, who cares about books, whether you're a bookseller or a librarian or a reader, a publisher, like what you're doing is participating in this great experiment that transcends our own lifetimes. And I just think that's so beautiful and important. So keep looking for voices that move you. Keep bringing new voices into the world, Brianna and Stu. And most of all, keep reading these stories. It's really important.
Thank you so much, Tony. This has been such a great discussion. I wish we could talk for another hour on Cloud Cuckoo Land. I loved it. I know so many of our book club members loved it. And if you haven't already picked up a copy, please do so you can share in all of our enthusiasm. One last reminder, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can still ask a question in the comment section of this video to enter for a chance to win a copy of Cloud Cuckoo Land and also a copy of All the Light We Cannot See. As for our November book club pick, this month we will be reading The Last Garden in England by Julia Kelly. We'll be chatting with the author on December 2nd at 3 p.m. So go check out our book club favorites Facebook group, simonschuster.com/bookclubs for more book club resources and more information about this next event. So I just wanted to say thank you again, Tony, Stu, and Brianna for leading such a lively discussion. I know there was so much enthusiasm about this book, and I can't wait to see what everyone else has to say.
Thank you so much, Holly. Thanks, Stu. Thanks, Brianna.
Of course. See you guys soon.
Okay, take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.